So next we have Tom Mellan, who is a research scientist at CryptoEconLab, Protocol Labs. And after a PhD in computational physics, he worked on statistical modeling for high social impact problems. And sorry, challenging market condition. Sorry, that's a different one. So yeah, so I think let's just get started. That's, yeah, sorry for being a very bad MC. Please, yes.
Yep. No, I think that's a good summary, so thank you. Okay, so as I said, my name is Tom Mellan. I'm a research scientist in CryptoEconLab, and I work on the core protocol element of it. And here today, I'm going to talk about data-driven economic decisions. Okay, so the agenda is I'm going to first start off by saying what exactly are data-driven economic decisions, and how are we then move on to talking about how are we using these to steer Filecoin's crypto-economic policies, and what the future of data-driven economic decisions might look like, as well as mentioning tomorrow is Crypto Econ Day, so everybody should come along, and also we're hiring lots of engineers. Okay, so the first point to say about data-driven economic decisions. So what does this mean? I mean, really, this is about gathering evidence. And how do we gather evidence? In order to do this, we have to have some data, and we have to interpret that data. Now, this might seem super obvious to anybody who comes from a kind of scientific background, but for the vast majority of history, having this explicit process of collecting data, ensuring it's accurate and reliable, carefully interpreting it, and then making a decision, this is not how people have went about things. They effectively guess. So actually doing this carefully is critical. And you can kind of get a sense of how critical it is by looking at the kind of range of fields that have been spawned. There's almost like a meme, evidence-based something. So you have evidence-based decision-making, evidence-based medicine. You have the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford, evidence-based design, policy, even evidence-based research. So you can kind of get a sense that it is not always so obvious taking this kind of scientific approach, carefully weighing data in order to come to decisions. So just to kind of frame things a little bit, where does crypto econ fit into the taxonomy of economics and also science more generally? So to get a sense of this, I think it's interesting to think about macroeconomics. And you can think of GDP. So imagine, for example, you want to think about how quality of life is changing over time. And a good indicator of that might be GDP per capita. Now, what is the GDP today? In fact, nobody knows. Nobody has a clue, and they won't know until quite some time in the future. This is because GDP and macroeconomics, it's very much in the kind of low data regime. It's low, unreliable data, and it's slow. So there's actually a very interesting statistical problem around this, and this came along. This really reared its head in like 2007, 2008, with the crisis then, and there was some really good work from Marta Bambura, specifically at the at the ECB. But it really just highlights that in macroeconomics, the quality of the data isn't great. It just isn't there. There is very little data, and in other parts of economics as well, for example, health economics, similar story. You often have lag data. You have real problems doing econometrics because you're so statistically underpowered. You have all of these problems of kind of misspecification and fallacies of grouping. So these are the kind of problems you hit in traditional economics whenever you're trying to interpret things. So where does crypto economics fit into this? Just to kind of frame things a little bit more, so crypto economics, the density of useful information to do analysis is so much higher. We're getting regular data, epoch level, very clear. It's kind of quite different to traditional economics. It's almost like, I mean, traditional economics is a social science, but what we're doing in crypto econ, at least from a data level, it's almost closer to a physical science in terms of the throughput of useful data that we can use to make decisions. So what are the decisions that we're actually trying to make? So after that framing, I can explain a little bit. So how do we actually steer economic policy with data? So as I said, I work in the core protocol working group of CryptoEconLab, and our number one priority is to sustain the health of Filecoin's economy. And the way that we do this, a lot of the time, our number one go-to resource is Starboard's dashboard. So we spend a lot of time staring at this daily, every day. We're monitoring this just to get a sense and a feel for things. Are terminations up? What's happening to circulating supply? What's happening to locking? And these kind of questions. But I mean, this is fundamental, but really it's just the first step. And on top of this, we have to do a little bit more analysis. So I can give you a few examples of this. So one of the pieces of work that we've done recently, in which data was absolutely critical, was to do with upgrading the Filecoin virtual machine gas and understanding what happens to the economics when this in this scenario. So in order to upgrade to the Filecoin virtual machine gas, there's a new metering of gas, but this potentially affects the kind of rationality and the decisions around submitting proofs. So understanding whether or not this would change was critical in terms of aggregating proofs. So that was some recent work we've done. And I can give you another example, another recent example that really relies heavily on data coming from Sentinel and also from Starboard as well. We get the data from directly sometimes. Is to do with circulating supply. So one of the recent questions here was, okay, what if sector durations were longer? Would this have any effect on circulating supply? So in order to model this, we have to create a model that can model the different components of supply: vesting, minting, locking, and burning. But this model alone is not good enough. You also have to base it in reality by parameterizing it with data taken from the chain. So that's something that we also worked on recently. And I'll just give you a couple more examples as well. So another example of something that we're working on at the minute with Shyam in our group is to do with proof of replication. So proof of replication is essential in Filecoin to associate unique physical capacity with data. But if a bug happens, this could be problematic for the chain because it's this proved data that backs up consensus. And if a bug happened, this would mean data would have to be resealed, and this is an expensive process. It means a lot of machine time to generate those proofs, as well as gas constraints to post those messages to the chain. And of course, you also have to think about is it rational for the storage provider to actually reseal the data based on the change in collateral, as well as the future block rewards. So this is another way we look at modeling these kind of things. So it's not just about Filecoin's kind of macro economics, it's also about things that are directly related to the cryptography and the proving. And of course, this model, this is like totally parameterized as well with data that comes from the chain. Okay, and then I can talk a little bit more about a final example, and this is Filecoin's adaptive minting system. So Filecoin has simple minting and it has baseline minting, and this is something Maria is working on and Kieran in our group. And this is really interesting and kind of, there's kind of fundamental questions here that are kind of coming up very soon for our network and that everybody should be thinking about a lot. So in the network, there's excellent and huge growth in terms of useful storage, but in terms of the raw byte, this is leveled off a little bit, and the way that Filecoin's system of incentives works is there's a kind of a network level encouraging effect in order to try to hit a certain level of growth in the actual raw byte storage as well. And if this doesn't happen, the minting will change to incentivize everybody to try to do that. So this kind of baseline crossing event, this is something that's coming up soon, maybe in the next 100 days or so. And this will have consequences for rewards and many other things and liquidity, as well as storage provider return on investment. So this is a really kind of fundamental and interesting thing. So you can work this out, but you can only work it out if you have a model plus the data. And this kind of allows us to see into the future a little bit. So without this, you can imagine you're driving essentially down a country lane without any lights. If you can do this and you can look into the future a little bit, not perfectly, but at least gives you some sense of what's coming. So that's useful. So I think that's the last example I wanted to give. Okay, so I wanted to end with a kind of historical note. So this is an etching of the Lisbon earthquake on the 1st of November in 1755, which occurred 267 days ago tomorrow. And 267 years ago tomorrow. Yeah, precisely. And this is a really important part of the story of Lisbon, and I think it's kind of interesting to reflect on as well. So it's fascinating from a geological point of view. The largest earthquake recorded probably in Europe. And of course, from a kind of personal perspective, there's an immense scale of human tragedy and suffering associated with that, and that's terrible. But it's also very interesting from a kind of socio-economic perspective. If we think about economies throughout Europe and throughout the world, they grow and they recede. And in Portugal, there's huge growth in the 15th and 16th centuries, and this was kind of bookended by the Lisbon earthquake. And this started a period of decline for some time. And I think it's just kind of interesting to think how different the economies that we are creating are. So the economies that we're creating, we have such high quality and regular data that allows us to see into the future. We can kind of create early warning systems and we can detect possible shocks that are coming along. And you have to be 100% aware and not hubristic at all. There will be shocks. But we're really in a kind of unprecedented position in terms of being able to detect these. So how do we do this? Well, I think we need to put a lot more resources into attracting people from other fields to come and work with us, to keep on developing the tools, the methods, the skills, and also to create the kind of community expectations to realize that the economics of a system, they shouldn't be fixed. We should expect these to change and to actively be able to steer the economy. So that's the last thing I want to end on. And I probably shouldn't have ended on a picture of an earthquake. I am very optimistic about the future, to be crystal clear. Okay, so just to say, tomorrow is CryptoEcon Day, so please come along to that, anybody who can. And also the CryptoEconLab is hiring engineering positions and also research scientists, so check those out if you can. Cheers.
Hi, fascinating talk. Have you? I was last year in like a refi conference. Anyway, have you talked to the guys at Block Science? They do something called CAD, which is like dynamic systems, and you can model dynamic systems.
Yeah, for sure. I talk to the guys at CAD a lot, and they're amazing. They do really cool research and huge overlap with us as well. Although they kind of take a bit of a different tack sometimes, but yeah, we're actively collaborating with them, and that's one of our plans as well for stuff like I mentioned, for baseline minting and trying to predict what's going to come along. So we're trying to use a range of methods. So we use the methods we've developed, but it would be also cool to actually use CAD as well. Yeah.
That's cool, because I heard them using it mostly for evaluating DAG changes and stuff like that, but it's cool to see like changes in protocols. I also have I met a guy from finance in Protocol Labs, and I'm curious to hear the collaboration here, because yes, Chris over there, that like you're responsible for the future of Filecoin's economy.
Yes, I mean, to the greatest extent that we can, we try to be stewards for the network, and we are really committed to trying to steer things and trying to understand all aspects of the economics to try to improve the core protocol. And we think going forward, that's absolutely something we will have to do. We will have to submit economic FIPs, and things will have to be improved to kind of keep things on the upward trajectory.
Hey, Tom. So post FIP 36, do you think one of or the retros or the things? 'Cause I know you did a lot of work on that. It was very impressive. How do you think does it get incrementalized? Like this is adjacent to the talk. Do you think does it get broken out into different parts, or do you think is that something outside of the scope of how CryptoEconLab works? It's something I've always thought of after spending a lot of time trying to think about it.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it's kind of difficult to answer. For FIP 36, we put forward the best economic policies that we thought there were for the network. And it was close, but the network decided they weren't quite ready for those. From my perspective, I'm totally committed to trying to support any kind of changes along those lines that would happen in the future. Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult to see. Difficult to answer. I mean, I know there's been various people who've been talking about potentially picking up different parts, and if they do that, I'll be happy to support them. Yeah.
Hey Tom, quick question about baseline minting. I know that you said next 100 days we might have a problem because we're going to be underneath the curve. Do you think there are any mitigating factors that that anything that we can implement from a protocol perspective, or do you think that we just kind of need to live with it and try to get back on the right track eventually?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the current estimates we have are about 15th of February, something like that, is when baseline crossing is expected. Could be a bit either side. I mean, there's a question. I mean, is this even a bad thing? This mechanism was designed for a reason. It's designed to keep a network on a trajectory. Baseline crossing is the network working as expected. So that's one thing. But I would also love to hear other people's thoughts on this. But of course, it is something we're actively looking into and monitoring super close, and we have a project ongoing in this. And Kieran here would be the person to talk about it. And potentially there might be some scope to look at redefining minting in terms of QAP rather than raw bytes. But all of this is kind of an active research question, but there are certainly things that we're considering. But if anybody else have thoughts on this as well, I'd be really keen to hear. Cheers. Thank you.